The forest behind my father's house had always been a place of solitude, where I would go to escape the bustle. Right after finishing university, I decided to spend some time at his country house, to try to relax, gather strength, and find myself. That forest, with its ancient trees, thick moss, and the vibrant sounds of nature, seemed like a portal to another dimension. It was here that I truly felt alive. One early morning, I left the house trying not to wake anyone. As I made my way through the undergrowth and stepped on old, crunchy branches, I felt the cool air fill my lungs, awakening my thoughts. The sun had not yet risen, and a thick fog blanketed the ground, giving the forest a mysterious appearance. This was my favorite moment, when everything around seemed unreal, as if I were in my own dream. I ventured deeper, heading to the spot where I usually sat on an old stump, contemplating life. But this time, as I approached the familiar clearing, I suddenly felt someone's presence. Stopping, I listened to the silence, and then soft footsteps blending with the rustle of leaves. Turning around, I saw Kelly, my stepmother, standing nearby, as if she too had come to find a quiet spot in this forest. "Good morning, Alex," she smiled. And that smile seemed unusual to me. Not cold and polite as usual, but warm, genuine. "I noticed you come here often. This place helps me think," I admitted, struggling to maintain eye contact. There was something about this morning, this forest, that made our words deeper, our gazes linger longer. "I need to get away from it all sometimes, too," she said, stepping closer. "It's easier to breathe here, isn't it?" We both fell silent, listening to the birds sing and the wind whisper through the trees. At that moment, I felt that she was just as lost as I was. Something had changed in her, and I sensed it even in the way she hugged herself, as if trying to protect against an invisible cold. "I always thought you didn't like it here," I muttered, feeling her presence grow more significant. "Maybe I didn't like it before," Kelly admitted, smiling at me with a mysterious smile that made my heart beat faster. "But now it's different." I looked at her, unable to understand what was making me feel so close to her at that moment. There was something in her gaze, in the way she looked at me, as if revealing herself for the first time in all these years. And it was then that I felt the tension hanging in the air between us. So obvious, so inexplicable. "Maybe we should head back," I finally said, trying to shake off this strange feeling. "Maybe," she replied, without taking a step back. We just stood there among the trees, looking at each other, while the forest seemed to hold its breath. Since that day, I couldn't stop thinking about my encounter with Kelly. Her words, her touch on the leaves as she spoke, almost like she was thinking out loud. All of it imprinted itself on my mind. It seemed as though the forest came alive when she was near. So, when I ventured into the woods again the next day, I had an inexplicable hope that I would see her again. And she came. I was sitting on the same old stump when I heard her soft footsteps. Kelly walked toward me, her face bearing the same expression as the day before, but now even more open, almost vulnerable. "You're here again," she said, sitting next to me. This time, closer than before. Her knee barely touched mine and it felt as if the air between us had thickened. "This forest really does something to you, doesn't it?" Her voice carried a hint of amusement. "Yes. It calms me," I replied, trying not to meet her gaze but feeling her eyes piercing through me. "And it feels like you can be yourself here. Sometimes I just want to run away from everything, she said quietly. And at that moment, I knew her confession meant more than just words. We sat in silence, as a light breeze carried the whispers of the leaves around us. It was a magical feeling, as if the forest itself was guiding us toward each other. Kelly suddenly leaned closer, and I caught the scent of her perfume. Sweet, with a hint of bitterness. Alex. Her voice was barely audible. Have you ever thought about how strange life can be sometimes? How people you know can suddenly become something else to you? I turned to her, and our faces were so close that I could feel her breath on my skin. My heart raced, as if trying to fill the silence between us. Suddenly, almost instinctively, I reached for her. Without thinking, without analyzing, just following that irresistible impulse. Our lips met. It was a soft, almost timid kiss, as if we were both afraid to shatter the moment. But then, as if yielding to an ancient call of nature, it deepened, becoming richer. I felt her hand slowly glide over my shoulders, while my fingers unintentionally intertwined with strands of her hair. At that moment, nothing else existed. No forest, no time, none of the complexities that stood between us. It was just a fleeting moment, filled with warmth, electricity, and that feeling you get when you find something forbidden but so desired. We pulled away, catching our breath, and Kelly looked straight into my eyes. Her gaze was full of doubts and questions. But at the same time, I saw the answer to the most important one. We shouldn't have, she whispered. But there was no regret in her voice. But we did, I replied, knowing that this moment would remain between us forever. The forest fell silent again, and we just sat there, pressed against each other, listening to the wind whisper through the treetops. After that kiss, everything changed. Each day I returned to the forest, hoping to meet Kelly. But she didn't appear. Every rustle, every sound seemed like her footsteps. But when I turned around, I saw only empty trees swaying in the wind. We no longer crossed paths at home, and the distance between us became unbearable. I knew I had to do something, to find a way to understand what was happening between us, even if it was just an illusion. On the third day, I headed to the forest earlier than usual, without hoping, but still wishing to see her again. The sun filtered through the leaves, and it seemed as though the whole world was bathed in golden light. When I reached the small clearing, my heart skipped a beat. Kelly was standing there as if waiting for me. I thought you had stopped coming here, she said, without turning around. Her voice was calm, but I noticed the tension in every word. And you thought I'd just forget? I replied, stepping closer, not wanting to let this distance grow. She finally turned to me. There was something new in her eyes, something I couldn't fully understand. Anxiety? Regret? Or perhaps that same spark I had seen in her the moment we first kissed. We need to talk, Kelly said, her voice trembling. About what happened? I nodded, though every part of me resisted what might happen next. I didn't want to hear that it had been a mistake or that she wanted to forget about it. But Kelly continued, and every word struck my chest with pain. Alex. She paused, gripping the edge of her jacket as if trying to summon the strength to continue. I never planned this. I never thought I'd allow myself to feel something like this. I'm married to your father. And this is wrong. Then why are you here? My voice came out louder than I expected. If it's wrong. If we shouldn't. Why did you come? She averted her eyes, and I saw her lips tighten as she struggled to find the answer. Because I can't stop. She finally said. I can't make myself forget. That answer hit me with a force that left me speechless. I stepped closer. So close that only a few inches separated us. I looked into her eyes. And in that moment I realized. She felt the same. The same mixture of fear, desire, and guilt. I'm not asking you to choose. I whispered. Barely breathing. Just don't leave. She stared at me in silence. And I could see the internal battle raging in her eyes. But instead of answering, she simply stepped forward and embraced me. That touch was so real. So warm. That I felt all my doubts fade away. Leaving only the desire to be close to her. Despite all the rules and fears. We stood like that for a long time. Until the daylight began to fade. And the coolness of the approaching evening settled around us. The days that followed became a sort of test for me. Every time I saw Kelly at home. When we exchanged brief glances at dinner. Or accidentally brushed against each other in the hallway. I felt that this hidden connection between us was growing stronger. There was also the constant sense that we were walking on a knife's edge. Trying not to make any sudden moves that could shatter the fragile balance. One evening, when my father was late at work, I decided to go to the forest again. Hoping that the fresh air would help me sort out my thoughts. When I reached the clearing that had become our meeting place, I saw her there. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself. As if trying to protect against an invisible cold. Even though the evening was warm. I knew you'd come. She said. Without turning around. You always know. I replied. Stepping closer. There was something in her voice that made me stop halfway. We can't go on like this. She declared abruptly. And at that moment, I felt she had decided to end it. We're deceiving your father. Deceiving ourselves. And I can't carry this burden any longer. What are you trying to say? Panic crept into my voice. I wasn't ready for this conversation. Wasn't ready to lose what we had. Kelly turned to me. And for the first time I saw tears glistening on her cheeks. I need you to understand. Alex. I'm not 25 anymore. And I can't afford to do what I'm doing now. I have responsibilities to your father. To myself. And to me? I interrupted. Feeling a dull pain squeezing my chest. Do you have any responsibility to me? Because I feel like this isn't just a whim. She shook her head. Covering her face with her hands. It's not a whim. I feel the same way. But we have to accept that this is wrong. Silence hung between us like a thick fog. And in that moment, it felt as though all my strength had drained away. I stepped closer to her. And taking her hands, gently pulled them away from her face. Her eyes were filled with despair. But behind it I saw that same spark I had noticed the first day. You say this is wrong. But why do you keep coming here? Why can't we look away from each other whenever we're close? I asked. Feeling all my doubts and fears vanish. Leaving only this one question. She didn't answer. But her hands tightened around mine. And in that moment I knew. She was just as afraid of losing this as I was. I leaned in. And she didn't pull away. Our lips met again. And this time there was no fear or doubt in the kiss. Only truth. The truth we had tried to ignore. But that had finally found its way out. We stood there. Embracing. As the light slowly faded. And I knew that whatever happened next, this moment would stay with us forever. Our last kiss became a turning point. After which everything became even more complicated. Kelly and I tried to behave naturally around my father. But this pretense was becoming harder and harder to maintain. In every glance. Every accidental touch. There was a hidden truth that we both tried to conceal. And despite all our efforts, I knew what had started in this forest wouldn't simply disappear. One evening, when my father announced he was going to the city on business, I saw an opportunity to return to the forest to think things over. I hoped that this time would be different. That I would be able to find the answers I so desperately sought. And as if guided by some invisible call, I knew Kelly would come too. She appeared at sunset. As the light began to fade and the shadows of the trees grew longer, her face was tense, but her eyes glowed with determination. She walked silently toward me. And for a while we just stood there, looking at each other, until she finally broke the silence. "I can't do this anymore, Alex," she said, her voice trembling. "It's wrong. And we both know it. We've gone too far." "I know," I replied, feeling the pain pierce my heart. "But what if what we feel is also true? What if this is the only real thing we have?" She closed her eyes as if trying to hold back tears. "But this truth will destroy everything around us. Your father. Me. And you too. And what are you suggesting? That we just forget about it?" I asked, refusing to believe such an outcome. She shook her head slowly. "No. I can't do that. But we need to find a way to move on. Each in our own lives." Her words cut through me like a knife. I tried to say something, but the words got stuck in my throat. All I could do was look at her, realizing that this might be our last moment together. "I'll never forget," I finally whispered. "You'll always be here. In this forest. In my heart." She stepped closer and our foreheads touched. There was so much tenderness, so much forgiveness, and sadness in that touch, that I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "And you will stay with me too," she replied, kissing me one last time. The kiss was soft. A farewell, filled with all the things we never had the chance to say to each other. We stood there until the sun had completely disappeared beyond the horizon. And only then did she pull away. "Goodbye, Alex," she whispered, and turned, leaving me standing among the trees in the forest that had become the witness of our secret. I watched her silhouette fade into the darkness and realized, despite everything that had happened, I didn't regret a single moment spent with her. Yes, our story had ended, but it had left a mark that would never fade. The forest fell silent once again. But I knew that it wasn't emptiness, but peace. The peace of knowing that we had found something real, if only for a short while. And perhaps that's where the true beauty of life lies. In those moments that stay with us forever. This concludes the translation. Let me know if you need any revisions or further assistance.